Welcome to the queue. We'll continue on in our house rule series. Today we'll look at fortifications, and you'll be able to find this video along with other house rule videos in a playlist labeled House Rules Don't Suck series. And you can look at some of my videos as well as some others that I've put in there, and I'll continue to add in there as I see them. And the fortifications is a deal where you're protecting units. You can throw some other items in there like coastal guns. You know, that's kind of a fortification, so they're defending your beaches or harbors or wherever you might have them. But you know, who doesn't want the Atlantic Wall to protect yourself when the Allies come knocking, you know, along the coast of Europe? I want one. So I would think that most people would. Now, a lot of the Axis and Allies, well, matter of fact, only one Axis and Allies game from the manufacturer has a fortification in it, and that is the D-Day game. It has a blockhouse, and the basic rule for the blockhouse in that game is it attacks the 5 beaches that the Allies are landing on. You know, to score a hit, you know, each turn, you roll the dice and it takes a unit off, you know, based off if it gets a hit or not. And then the Allies will, with naval bombardment, try to knock those out. And they knock them out in a fairly decent order. The blockhouses don't last too far into the game usually. But that's the only Axis and Allies in-game fortification that there is. Now, the Global War series, you know, they're on version 3 now. They have fortifications, they have the coastal guns, you know, some of the other things, the sub-pens, kind of things that you would kind of consider fortifications. And then let's also look at some other things that other people have used. And HBG has some different varieties, whether it's a acrylic chip or an actual 3D printed fortification like the ones, you know, behind me. So let's take a look at some of those. So here's a quick lineup of some of the fortifications that I've picked up from Shapeways, Combat Miniatures, and off of the HBG's website. And all of those except for the far one on the right is are 3D printed. The one on the right is the blockhouse from the D-Day game, and it comes black, you know, like the Germans' units in the game, so I just spray painted them gray just so they look more like a fortification. And then the blue one there, I think, is Maginot Line fortification, so they made it blue, sort of the French. But you don't need all those different varieties. Really, you only need one. Unless you are going to specify between 2 types of fortifications, you know, one without a coastal gun or artillery or anti-tank gun versus just the regular machine gun style or observation style fortifications. So let's put some of those on the board and talk about how they are used in various games. Let's look at some costing and mods that the fortifications can bring, and what I've seen in some games, different games around. You know, you might be paying 5, 8, or 10, you know, for a bunker or a fortification, or however you want to call that. And like in a D6 game, you know, you would get a +1 modifier to your units. In Global War's 1936 game, they use a 12-sided dice, so their modifier is a +2. So I'll show you here in a little bit how that plays out, you know, on an actual battle. But that's kind of like the basics for the fortifications. Now, there is another twist where you would have maybe minor and major fortifications. Whether you want to divide that by the ones with the guns, you know, artillery, anti-tank guns, coastal guns, versus just your straight machine gun, you know, pillboxes. That's up to you. But I've seen it you know, you've got your minors, which are usually in that 5, 8, or 10 range, and then the majors, you know, could go up to 20. And 20 sounds like a lot for a major fortification, and it kind of is actually when you think about it. The 20 that I'm referring to was in the deluxe game. We'll look at 3 different games. We'll compare the cost and what their effects are on the game. But in the deluxe game, they had a major that was 20 IPCs to place, which is huge. The flip side is you're giving this +1 bonus to 6 infantry, and the other bonus is you can also take 6 hits on a fortification. So your first 6 hits would take that fortification out. So that kind of gets you your 20, you know, IPC cost to be worth it. You know, without the hits coming off that fortification, then yeah, 20 would be way too high. So that could be somewhat of a problem. But for all intensive purposes, though, just a fortification is a fortification. I've only seen the major fortification in one other game. So I'll show you some deluxe here rules and the Global War 36 rules. And then here's a new one. It's not really new. I've not talked about it in any of these other house rule videos, but the Grafton Gaming Group. And if you're not familiar with that, it is the group that Der Künstler runs on the Illinois side of St. Louis, and they have a anniversary style map that they've you know, did a reproduction, you know, and increased the size of the map, beefed up some of the territories, IPC values, and changed it up just a little bit. But it's basically, you know, a beefed up Axis and Allies anniversary map. And they've come out with their own set of house rules, units, setups. It's actually pretty fun. I've printed the map, you know, a while ago and played it here, but they actually have 3 different varieties of fortifications in here, so that's why I thought this would be a good one to bring in. So let's look at how it appears on a battlefield. So here's a poorly defended Cairo. UK troops here, 3 infantry, artillery, 1 mech, 1 tank, and a fighter. And against the Italian, basically Italian can opener, followed by the German assault, you know, on the following turn, Cairo should fall. There shouldn't be an issue there, but let's talk about adding a fortification there. And I forgot to mention that the Grafton Gaming Group rules, house rules, on AxisandAllies.org, you can go look at those in the house rule section. Just look up, you know, Der Künstler, and he actually, and it may be actually pinned to the top, or at least it used to be, you know, where you could print off his rules. And the latest edition is this 7.3 right there, and you can get that and play that game. Of course, the setup is going to be a little different if you don't have his map, but you can maybe work that out with a anniversary map. But in the Grafton Gaming rules, the let me get on the other side here. The fortification costs $8. So you're going to place a fortification there, and then in their setup, what you're going to get for your $8 there is 4 hits. So when the Italians do their first can opener and they come in, your first 4 hits will take that fort down. Now, will the Italians get 5 or 6? Maybe they get 6 hits, you know, before they run out of infantry. I don't know. They probably don't get, looking at that, probably don't get more than 4 hits, you know, in 2 rounds of combat. But they might take that fort out. So that would be a benefit there. The next one I'll look at is the deluxe. So if we're going to use just a minor fortification, well then it's going to give a +1 to these 3 infantry. And then you can take 3 hits, you know, on a minor fortification. So that's pretty decent, because now those Italians, even though the fort only has 3 hits to give, probably still again aren't going to get into, you know, maybe not even through the 3 hits and into the, you know, 1 or 2 infantry if they're extremely lucky. But you never know. So that could be there. And then, you know, of course the minor in the deluxe is $10. Now the Global 36, the way their rules are, it's the $10, but I think you have to buy it in let me go over here again. You have to buy it in 2 stages. You know, $5 gets it on the production board, and then the next turn another $5 gets it on the map. Now when it's on the map in the Global 36 game, the fortifications have to be placed on borders. In this instance, that's no problem. But if you've got a territory where you can get around, or say like this, the Sahara Desert wasn't impassable, or you drew in an event card where the African Corps can drive through the desert, well now they can go 1, 2, you know, these tanks and mechs, or 2 tanks and mech can come around with that Stuka, ignore the fort completely. Same with the Italian tank, and then you don't have to deal with the fort. So in that instance, if this wasn't here, that impassable, you would need a fort here and a fort here, you know, on the 2 borders. So now you're talking $20, and only one of those forts is going to be used, because if they capture this territory, then the forts are gone. So that's kind of a risky deal. So you've got to place your fort in a location where you know the enemy is going to attack. So for the fort being on the border, what that gets for you in the Global 36 game is +2, because I use a 12-sided dice, so it's +2 to every land unit. So that's a benefit here when you get to the well, I say that it's really only a benefit on that tank. It's a benefit to everybody, but a huge benefit on the tank. The downside is it's only lasts for 1 turn, that first round of combat. So these infantry are defending at 4 along with that mech. So those will defend at 6. The artillery defends at a 3, so that'll defend at a 5. The tank defends at a 6, so now that defends at an 8. And then of course your fighter is not affected by the fort. So there's no hits to the fort. It's just on the first round of combat +2. If the Britain survives, the fort stays. If Britain falls and the Axis take Cairo, then the fort goes away, and that's the end of that. So the other thing too is, if Italy is coming with an amphibious assault, you know, and they come around the north side, that fort is only on the border. So no effect on that. So they, you know, they could come in and sweep out the 3 infantry. Well, now then Germany comes in on their turn. They still have to deal with that fort on the first round, much less units there. So you kind of have to watch where you're going to place your forts and kind of determine where the enemy might come from in Global War 36. Let's look at some of the other kinds of fortifications that there are available. Not all of them are in games. Some of them you just have to make up your own rules. But let's take a look at some different fortifications. Coastal guns is another type of fortification that you'll find in some games. In the Grafton group, they have theirs at 8 IPCs per coastal gun. they are limited to attacking or defending against enemy transports bringing in, you know, an amphibious assault. So they're kind of limited there. You know, like if you've got a shore bombardment with battleships or whatever, they don't get to actually shoot at them. They only shoot, say if you were coming in with 3 transports loaded down, you would get 3 dice. If you get a hit, then you kill the transport with the units that are in it. So that could be huge, but you've got to be very specific on where you've got your coastal gun, obviously, to deter, you know, amphibious assaults, or, you know, get lucky on that roll. I mean, it's not a very high roll anyway. I don't remember if it's a 1. I think they're just throwing a 1. So I think you've got to throw a 1 to get that hit. The other game, Global War 36, you've got to roll a 3 to get a hit, and it's cost 6 IPCs to buy the coastal guns. Now the difference in the Global War game is that any ship making a bombardment or transports are involved in the coastal guns firing on. And then I think there's a limit of 3, so it's kind of like an anti-aircraft gun for ships. So if you've got 1 transport and 3 cruisers and a battleship coming in, you still only get 3 dice at 3 to see about getting hits, you know, and it doesn't specify that it's a target select, so it's the defender will choose, and obviously they won't choose the amphibious or the transport because they don't want to lose that amphibious invasion. So I guess if you had 2 coastal guns, you know, you could roll up to 6 dice at 3 based off if there was 6 ships involved with shore bombardment or amphibious landing. Another, swipe those off, is the flak tower, and those are pretty much up to you. The way we've played it is if you buy a flak tower and you place it in a factory that you know that's going to be bombed, it basically increases your anti-aircraft, because normal anti-aircraft is at a 1, so it just increases your anti-aircraft shot to a 2. Interesting story about the flak tower, and that is a beefy one. That's a 3D printed unit, and then this is just some plastic one to represent that from HBG. But an interesting story on the flak towers in Berlin, when the Russians were surrounded Berlin and had basically taken it all over. Some of the last holdouts of German resistance was in these flak towers. They actually pulled up heavy artillery, their heavy tanks, and they were firing at those flak towers at point blank range, and they were constructed so well that they did very little damage, and they basically just waited out the inhabitants to surrender, whether they were, you know, running out of food or water or ammo or whatever. So that's kind of cool, but it doesn't really have any place in this game. Let's look at some submarine pins. So the submarine pins, I've got a single sub pin, which is a 3D printed unit or structure, and then the other one is a plastic one that you glue together, and it has it has a slot for 2. So depending on that, like in the Grafton Gaming group, they actually have sub pins that hold 1, and I believe they cost 8 IPCs there. So basically what that does is when your sub is inside there, it is impervious to attack from air or sea. So it's safe in the sub pin. If your land zone that is in is captured by the enemy, then of course it's all destroyed and goes away. Now, I do want to bring up one of the most famous sub pins ever, and it was somewhere here in the Mediterranean. No idea where it was, but a German sub coming from Cairo with the Ark of the Covenant pulled in there, and it actually had an unsuspecting rider, Indiana Jones, and they opened up the Ark of the Covenant on that island, wiped everyone out except for Indiana Jones and the girl. They escaped with the Ark of the Covenant, and to this day that island has remained a mystery. So that's a little side fact as well. So we'll finally look at some smaller fortification type structures, and an obvious one is the naval mines, and that actually takes place in the Axis and Allies 1914 game. There are specific naval zones that have that are protected by naval mines, and basically as you're running your ships through those zones, you know, like say if this was a German and some British ships were coming through here, however, you'd roll a dice for each ship, and a roll of 1 is a hit. So those are interesting, and that's just a plastic acrylic chip from HBG, and very simple rules, you know, kind of like an anti-aircraft for ships in the water, so to speak. You could limit it to 3, or like in the Axis and Allies 1914 game, you know, any ship that comes in. One of my favorite small fortification is entrenchment, and this is from the Grafton group. Der Künstler came up with these, and basically it's in an entrenchment, and they use them, the chips, basically as hits. As an example, at the beginning of the German turn, they would get to place an entrenchment, you know, in a zone that had German infantry somewhere. So Germany elects to place it there. Britain's turn, they come in to attack, and they've got, you know, the 2 1s and a 3. Well, if they only get 1 hit, basically the entrenchment chip absorbs that hit, and the German infantry survives to round 2. And, you know, you could basically, if you were defending this for several turns, you know, you could have several chips. I think the max is 5 entrenchment chips. So if you've got a hot zone, you know, like if you'd taken, you know, just north of here, Gibraltar or something, and you throw some entrenchment chips in there, maybe a fortification, you could really beef that up pretty quick. And basically all I did, I took some brown chips and I printed out, as you can see, a bunch of picks and shovels, and I sized them to fit the center of that chip. So cut them out, tag them on, and then of course I use brown chips because brown is the color of dirt. So that's where I went with those. So I really like that. We use that, and we use it in some other games here, and what we'll do is in your purchase phase, for 3 IPCs you get 2 entrenchment chips, and they have to go wherever, you know, the infantry, you know, you have to have infantry there. The thing about that is if you've got your infantry here on that chip and say you want to retreat, you know, back of territory, well, that stays, and if Britain moves in, then they're just gone. So undefended entrenchment chips do nothing. So that is, like I said, that's the entrenchments. I really like that. And these little markers, you know, they have mines, barbed wire, tank traps, anti-tank ditch. What do they have? They actually have entrenchments, you know, in this these chips. So they've got a variety of different ways you could use those, and I've not seen them in games, which, you know, it'd be neat to see those in somebody's actual game, you know, in the rules. I have seen, and it's on a video from Hilltop Pillbox, and I tried to find it this morning, and I couldn't find where he used them because, and he didn't label the video, you know, mines, and then the other one he had was barbed wire, and it's like, wow, that's a really good one, you know, like if the Germans put the mines in there and then they come in, well, then you would roll a dice, and if you got a hit, you know, obviously you kill a unit. Now if that's the barbed wire and you got a hit, then one of the units had to retreat. So I really liked his rules for the mines and barbed wire that he had in that video. I just couldn't find it to give you the clarifications on, you know, how much he was buying the minefield or the barbed wire for, and what that dice roll was. But for the website for HBG, if they had like below it, you know, suggested house rules, because I've seen that for other units, but I haven't seen it on these chips for, you know, different fortifications, different things like that. So just a hint, if anyone's watching, you know, throw in, you know, for your chips, you know, and really they sell these. I think I've seen these and those on there. Well, didn't even get them in the screen, but you know, they've got the 3D bunkers and coastal guns, and in addition to the chip kind. So, you know, go on HBG, poke around. Shapeways is another one, Combat Miniatures. They all have different fortifications, and I suggest, you know, find some that you like, and you know, like I say, whether it's the 3D kind or the plastic chips, try them out. That's all I got to say. I like them. Good for defense. I like building that Atlantic wall, you know, in games where I can go at Russia and prepare for the U.S., you know, and its move on Europe that eventually comes. So a lot of things there are helpful. And I'm trying to think if there was anything else to add. I don't think so. So thanks for watching, and I hope you try out some of these fortifications and keep rolling dice.